Hello and welcome to Congressman Henry Cuellar's Capitol Report. Your voice from Washington for the 28th District of Texas.
Every day, taxpayers interact with the federal government on a regular basis, whether it's through the passport services, student loans through the direct loan program to pay for higher education.
Every month, we bring home to you the issues that matter the most. And now, here's your update from the nation's capital.
Thank you for joining Congressman Henry Cuellar's Capitol Report for the month of September. This report is an opportunity to get an inside view on current issues in Washington and how they affect you in the 28th District of Texas. Congressman, as we start the fall legislative calendar, there are a number of pending issues on the legislative calendar, including immigration reform, various fiscal issues, the passage of the Farm Bill, the Water Resources Development Act, and transportation funding. Let's start with immigration. Why is it so important that we pass reform now?
Well, first of all, this will boost the economy, not only the Texas economy, not only my congressional district, but the whole country, because you're talking about folks that can provide to the economy that will start paying taxes. Just the fact that they will pay more taxes than what they're paying right now is going to help the economy also. And keep in mind that there's a lot of big companies that we know, like Google, AT&T, McDonald's, and other companies that were started by immigrants or their children. So you're talking about entrepreneurs, people that want to come work and want to do great for our country. Also, keep in mind that out of the top Fortune 500 companies, should I say, 40 of those big companies have been started again by immigrants or their kids. So this shows the power of immigrants. And again, we want to make sure that we do it the right way. Border security, a guest worker plan, a visa system, and then of course, what do we do about the 11 or 12 million undocumented persons that we're here? Anybody with a criminal record, I'll be the first one we get them out of here. But the rest of the folks that want to work and they pay their taxes and set whatever criteria we need to set for them, I think we ought to look at that very carefully.
What do you think are the prospects for passing immigration reform this year?
Well, it's difficult because, again, the Senate has passed the bill. Now it's up to our Republican colleagues that they control the House. They say what's put on the calendar. They will decide if something is going to be put in the calendar and in what form. So we're hoping that our Republican friends will look at working a bipartisan agreement so we can have some sort of immigration reform. Just like in 1986, a Republican president by the name of Ronald Reagan and the Democratic Congress were able to pass immigration reform. Now, we can learn a lot of lessons from 1986. The first thing is, I'll be the first one to say, I don't want to see amnesty. I do not want to see amnesty like President Reagan did in 1986. But I think we ought to have some sort of way of addressing sensible, strong border security, sensible border security, a program of guest workers where Americans, that don't want to do certain jobs, allow some people to do those jobs that Americans don't want to do. And then the third thing, of course, is at least legalize, take those people out of the shadows and get them to start paying taxes and become part of this society. Not where they're going to come in and take all these social programs. We want them to work. We don't want them to be falling on those social services. We want them to work and provide to our economy.
So ideally for you, an immigration reform bill would include those things you just mentioned about border security.
Right, that is correct. And again, it's one of those that I'm hoping that we get to do this year, because if we don't, the 2014 elections will be here, then the 2016 elections will be here, and then we're not going to be able to address this to 2017. So again, we could either put our heads in the sand and say, well, those people are not here, we're not going to do anything about that. No, I think we need to do something. I mean, if you saw what Ronald Reagan did, he pushed and got immigration reform. If you look at President George W. Bush, he pushed for immigration reform very, very, very hard. And so we've had both Democrats and Republicans that have said this. The other day I was reading a book on George Washington, the presidency of George Washington, our first president. And when he was at the Virginia, he was setting up this Virginia regiment. A lot of those people that he had recruited were actually immigrants. they were immigrants. So, the immigrants have been part of our American story from before the Revolution. And here we are, George Washington trying to put this Virginia regiment together. And who does he have? The majority of those people were immigrants.
If immigration reform can't be done through one bill, would you support a piece-by-piece approach, or do you think you want to hold out for one?
Well, yeah, I certainly want to see a full comprehensive immigration reform with those three parts that I mentioned: border security, some sort of guest worker plan, and then, of course, dealing with the 11 or 12 million undocumented aliens. But the Republicans, again, they control the calendar. And what they're talking about right now is basically piecemeal. They want to do parts of it. If we end up in the same place, whether it's comprehensive or piecemeal, I can certainly look at a piecemeal approach, depending what's in that on that piecemeal approach itself.
Thank you, Congressman. Another set of issues facing Congress that has a fundamental effect on every American are pressing concerns of the budget, raising the debt ceiling, and dealing with the sequester. Congressman, why is it so difficult for Congress to pass a budget, and what's at stake for the everyday American?
Because I think people are focusing on the politics instead of the policy, on what's in the best interest of the country. I'm a Democrat, will always say as a Democrat, but I'm not going to put my political party over the best interest of my nation. I think Democrats do that at times, Republicans do that, and on both sides, to be fair, to be equal opportunity on both of them, I think that's what some people do. The majority of the members of Congress want to do the right thing for the country, and if we don't put this politics aside and focus on what's good for as we say, the best interest of our country, we're going to start having difficulties from passing certain pieces of legislation. So when I was in the state legislature and I was in the appropriations committee there, we were always told that, we would pass in the state of Texas. We would look at 5,000 bills, 1,000 of them would pass, but the most important bill every time was the appropriation bill. Of course, here in Congress, we have 12 appropriation bills. We don't have one because it's a $3.7 trillion budget every year. But we should be focusing on the appropriations and the budgets and make sure we have a balanced, fair appropriations, where we keep away from those deficit spending. But at the same time, consider other bills, but this should be the most important one. Unfortunately, here in Washington, we do the reverse what we used to do in Texas. We look at everything else, and at the end, like we're doing now, we're looking at the appropriations or the budget itself.
Why do you think that is, and what do you think members of Congress can do to focus more on the budget?
Well, again, if I had one of those red buttons, like the commercial says, and I had it my way, I would say, let's work on this from the very beginning. Let's focus on this. Let's get the job done, and we won't have to worry about this. Unfortunately, everything else is done first. That's the way things have been done here for many, many years. And again, I think we need to focus on the priorities of the United States. Put the policy first instead of the politics. But that's unfortunately what it is. Here again, our Republican friends are in charge of the House. We got to work with their schedule. We got to work with their calendar. I just ask everybody to work in a bipartisan way to get this budget done like we've done in the state of Texas for many, many years.
How do you think a budget should tackle the Republican opposition to increasing taxes and Democratic opposition to tackling the entitlement programs?
Well, I think everybody needs to give in a little bit. We ought to compromise. Some people say, well, compromise is an ugly word. They can't even use the word compromise or consensus in one sentence. But if you look at it, our Constitution was built on consensus, was built on compromise. I mean, what do you think there's a member of Congress and senators? Well, because the big states and the low states, when they were trying to put this together, worked out an agreement that we would have members of Congress pay some population, then every state, big or small, would have 2 senators, and it was built on a compromise, a great compromise. Here, some people are just, have forgotten that, when you have geographical differences, political differences, philosophical differences, differences because of different reasons, at the end of the day, we ought to get together and work out a consensus and a compromise.
Right now, the House is working on potentially passing a continuing resolution for the budget. Could you explain to our viewers what that means and what you think is going to happen?
Because Congress didn't do its job in passing a budget which should have been done before September 30th, because as you know, our year finishes September 30th and October 1st is when September 30th and October 1st is when we're supposed to start a new fiscal budget. We have to do a continuing resolution, or CR, which means continue the budget as is till we finish and we do an appropriation bills, should I say, 12 of them. And again, it's because Congress hasn't gotten together. Again, if I had one of those red buttons, I would press that button and I would say, let's get the job done early, and then let's go ahead and do what we need to do, set the priorities, and then work from there. Problem is that you have two extremes. On one side, Democrats don't want to touch certain things. Republicans don't want to touch certain things, so we're off at a standoff. And again, without consensus or compromise, here we are.
What do we lose out from by passing a continuing resolution instead of creating a new budget as we're supposed to every year?
Well, first of all, we don't set up a strategic forward vision on how we ought to be running our government or the agencies, because we're going on stopgaps. You know, let's do it here. Are we going to have another budget? When are we going to do it? When are we going to do the appropriations? That's not the way to run government, and that's not the way to run a business. So that's what we lose out. We lose that long-term strategic planning, and therefore we end up with a government that's based on crisis, reacting from one crisis to another crisis. That's the problem that we have up here in Washington. We don't have forward strategic thinking on how we do our job. That is wrong, that is wrong, that is wrong. And till we get to that day and we start doing that strategic budgeting, planning, performance measures, making sure that government is efficient and effective, then we can get our job done, and the taxpayers would appreciate that their taxpayers are being used in the most efficient, effective, accountable way.
You've long been an advocate of government efficiency. Could you tell our viewers something about the things you've done this year to improve the efficiency of our federal government?
Well, first of all, a couple of years ago, we passed what we call the GIPRA, the Government Results Modernization Act, which was the first time we modernized this act since, I believe it was since 1994. This is something that I focus on when I was in Texas. This is something that we have focused when we're here, and that is to get government to be more results-oriented. We passed that, but we're seeing that some of the agencies are not doing what they're supposed to do. So therefore, now that I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee, I want to use their budget where we can actually set some of the performance. Let me take it back. They are doing some things. For example, Homeland Security as an example. I'll use that since I'm in the Homeland Security Appropriations. We spend billions of dollars to prevent terrorism from occurring in the United States. So when they look at the mission of protecting our country, our homeland from terrorism, what is the measure that one should have to make sure that you're doing your job? Of course, you would say having zero number of terrorist attacks in the country. That should be your number one measure after spending billions of dollars. Where their number one measure, believe it or not, this is the Department of Homeland Security, where we spend billions of dollars. I think overall it's about a little bit over $39 billion a year. Their measure is the government reports or the intelligence reports that we provide our partners. This is Homeland, like the other local state agencies. Are you satisfied with those reports that we send you? It is an incredible, nonsensical way of measuring how we spend billions of dollars. So one of the things that I've been adding in every appropriation bill is to say that the GO, Government Accountability Office, will work with the agencies and with us in Congress and set what those measures should be. So if we give you $1, we want to know, what are you measuring with that $1? And that is something that I'm hoping we can add that language to all the appropriation bills this year. And then next year, when the GAO has sat down, and I like working with the GAO because they understand this, they're passionate about it just like I am, then we can get better measurements. So when we ask Homeland, hey, we give you billions of dollars to stop terrorism from coming to our homeland, and instead of your number one measure should be for all the billions of dollars we give you, instead of saying, hey, are you happy with this report that we provided you? No, they should say the number of terrorist attacks in the United States for this year is 0. That should be, as an example, their number one performance measure, and not, are you happy with some report that we sent over? It's incredible. That's only one example. You can go department to department to department. It is incredible the way we measure. And then people wonder why there's so much waste, inefficiencies in our government. That's why, because we're not even measuring things correctly.
And as a member of the Appropriations Committee, you took concrete action this year to combat that government inefficiency, correct? That
is correct. We have added specific language asking that we redo those performance measures so we can measure the effectiveness, the results. And because at the end of the day is, again, if we give you $1 agency, we expect you to tell us how you spend that dollar. Was it efficient? Was it effective? And are you accountable to us?
Thank you, Congressman. Moving on to another fiscal issue regarding the debt limit. Can you explain to our viewers what's at stake if Congress does not raise it?
If the United States government defaults, it would send such ripple effects across not only the country but the world. That means our credit worthiness would be devastated. That means that the great superpower called the United States of America can't pay its bills. It would just be incredible. I mean, I've been in some countries where people from other governments smile, and I don't want to say snicker, but they smile and say, you guys can't get this together. I mean, here we are, the greatest. They admire us. They look at us, and they know that if we don't do this correctly, it's going to have a ripple effect across the world to other countries. And we got to understand that it's not only good for us, but it's also important to the economy of the rest of the world. The debt ceiling, you know, there's some people on the other political side that are saying, well, don't worry about that. It's not going to have an effect, and it's not going to do this. It does have an effect. And again, they think that if you don't raise the debt ceiling, then that will reduce spending. Keep in mind that it is the appropriations and the spending that has been done by both Democrats and Republicans for years. It's not President Obama only. It is past Republican presidents and Democrats, administrations, and Congresses also that have contributed to the debt that we have. And keep in mind that if you want to control that spending, it's not fail at your debt limit, but it's also, but the most important thing is to make sure we control the spending at the beginning, not at the end. It's like getting a credit card bill at the end of the month and saying, you know what, I'm not going to pay this bill, or I'm just going to pay one bill, I'm not going to pay the other. The credit cards will say, no, you spend it, now you got to pay for it. It's the same thing with us. And it's interesting, you know, people play political games right now. You know, they say, well, Democrats are doing this, Democrats are doing this. But if you look at the history book, the president that has raised the debt ceiling more than anybody in recent years was President Ronald Reagan, a Republican. So again, you know, let's not play this political games that it's one president versus another president itself also. I also find it interesting that when, fair to everybody, that when President George Bush was the president, there was a young senator by the name of Barack Obama that was saying, when President Bush wanted to raise the debt ceiling, this young senator named Barack Obama was saying, don't raise it, because if you do, it's a lack of leadership. And then you had Bush that wanted to raise the debt ceiling. Then you had Cantor and Boehner, the Republican speaker and leader right now, that were saying, let's do it. Then Obama becomes the president, and everything has turned around. Now President Obama is saying, we got to raise the debt ceiling, in other words, it's bad. And then you have Cantor and Boehner that are saying, no, I don't think we ought to do that. It is this type of games by everybody that is wrong, wrong, wrong. And this is why we ought to put policy ahead of politics in Washington, D.C. And when we don't, then we get this type of gridlock that the American people are very frustrated about.
Thank you, Congressman. I'd like to address another piece of legislation that's extremely personal to many of our viewers. The Farm Bill has traditionally been a partnership between rural and urban America, between those who produce our food, those who buy it, those who eat it. However, since 2008, the House and the Senate have not been able to pass a farm bill. What's been happening and why have there been so many roadblocks?
Yeah. You know, we had a vote, and the Farm Bill has always been a very bipartisan way. And again, the ones that control, and this is all facts, not political, but just the facts, Republicans control the House right now. They control the budget. I mean, they control the budget too, but they control the calendar. They control what gets on that. They control what type of bills come in. They control also pretty much if there's amendments, no amendments. They get input from the Democrats and all this. I say this because for the first time in recent history, we can't pass a bipartisan bill. I mean, even the Republicans among themselves can't pass a farm bill. They blame the Democrats. A good friend of mine, Republicans, well, you Democrats didn't help us. Well, in 2008, when we passed the farm bill, we only had 17 Republicans that helped pass that bill. And of course, this last time when the Republicans couldn't pass it, when they were blaming us, we actually had 24 Democrats supporting it. So it's not this thing about blaming Democrats or, in this case. But again, when Bush back in 2008 vetoed the farm bill twice, say whatever you want to about Nancy Pelosi, but she was a leader. She could get the job done. She passed a bipartisan bill with 318 Democrats and Republicans and overrode the president's veto twice. I keep telling my farmers and my ranchers, look at who passed the farm bill last time. And the farm bill is important for the ranchers and for the farmers, but it's also important for our school lunches, for our food banks, and for those people that depend on those food assistance. Now, the majority of those people that receive the food assistance are women, children, and disabled. You hear a lot of those horror stories, oh, look who's taking advantage of it, and look what they're doing. They're eating better than you and I. And if there is a problem like that, let us know. And if there's fraud, let's go after those people. But the majority of the people that receive that assistance are women, children, and the disabled itself. And then, of course, school lunches. Then, of course, food banks. And we gotta put this farm bill together. We work it because, again, some people in the urban areas might say, well, why are we interested in the farm bill? Well, food doesn't appear from just from anywhere in the air. It comes from those fields and from those ranches and those farms, and that's why we got to work with those ranchers and farmers to make sure that we get the fuel here, the food to our table. And so it's a partnership that we need to have in a balanced way.
If in an ideal world, what would you like to see happen on the farm bill in the coming months?
Well, if I had the little red button again, and if I had my way, I would have a bipartisan bill like we did in 2008. We would have it fair to make sure that the nutrition part of it is there. And of course, whatever assistance that we provide our farmers or ranchers. If we don't do that, one of the things that would happen, and this is what we keep telling our Republican friends, and I've told my ranchers and farmers, said, hey, look at what's happening here. We don't hear much of you complaining about why this farm bill has not passed. But I would ask them to look at this very carefully, because if we don't do a farm bill, we're going to revert back to a 1930 law. And the prices of milk are going to go up. So if we don't pass this farm bill, as an example, the price of milk might go up. And if you're paying a little bit of money right now for milk, it could go up if we don't pass the farm bill, as an example.
Got it. Anything else you'd like to add about the farm bill, Congressman?
Well, the only thing is, I was in the Ag Committee for 8 years. It's a very good committee. I still, have, friends like the ranking member, Colin Peterson, Mr. Lucas, who's the chairman right now, Democrat, Republican. They've been trying real hard in the past to do this. The Ag Committee was always a very bipartisan committee, and it's unfortunate that this bipartisanship didn't equate the same thing on the floor. But again, you got to look at who's in control of the House, who puts a calendar, who puts the type of bills up there, and again, we can get this done in a bipartisan way, but you got to have Democrats and Republicans sitting down working together.
Lastly, Congressman, an issue that's especially important to many of your constituents, especially those living in the areas surrounding the Eagle Ford Shale, is the issue of condition of the roads. In 2012, you voted for MAP 21, the Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century bill that provided over $300 billion of funding for the state of Texas for infrastructure. The bill expires at the end of 2013, and debate on the next bill will begin in December. What worked in the past bill, and what would you like to see happen for the reauthorization?
Yeah, actually, about $3 billion. It came to the $3 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Would have been great if we would have got $300 billion, but $3 billion. Well, first of all, we got to do a reauthorization. We've been working with Nick Rahal, who's the ranking member of Transportation Committee, and then Bill Schuster, who's the chairman, a good man. And we're hoping that we can pass a transportation bill. A transportation bill that will be, that will provide the money that we need for our roads and our bridges. A transportation bill that will hopefully look for areas that have had high growth areas like the Eagle Ford, where there's a lot of traffic, and hopefully there'll be some way of addressing that. Hopefully it will provide some assistance also to have a high-speed train cargo to go from Oklahoma to the Dallas to San Antonio to Laredo, and then working with the Mexican side all the way up to Monterrey. And so we got to look at all that. But again, the big question is going to be is how do we pay for it? People want to put things on credit cards. We don't do that anymore. We don't want to put this on the debt. We want to pay for it. So if we're going to have good roads, we got to figure out how do we pay for the roads. The highway bill has been very good to the state of Texas. We've sent in literally billions of dollars every time we do one of those bills. So I will continue working with Mr. Schuster, Chairman Schuster, and Rahal, and the members of the Committee of Transportation, people like people like Blake Fairhurst, Eddie Bernice Johnson from Texas. They're both on the Transportation Committee. We're going to work with them to get the job done for our roads in Texas and our bridges in Texas.
Thank you, Congressman. Could you provide a little bit more information about your plans for the high-speed train?
Well, it's basically, as you know, the plan was to go from Oklahoma and stop in San Antonio. Actually, I think it was close to 2008. I had an amendment and said, I'm sorry, but nothing, not everything stops in San Antonio. There is another 150 miles plus to go down to the border. So I added some language where it can go, hopefully connect from San Antonio to Corpus, to the Valley, to Laredo, put that type of language there. And of course, working through Laredo and then working through our friends in Monterrey, we want to look at a train that will carry cargo and transportation also. Cargo, as you know, Laredo is the largest customs area in the South, and certainly we're looking at something that will provide a lot of trade and businesses for us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Congressman Cuellar. And thank you to our viewers for joining us for this month's edition of the Capitol Report. We look forward to seeing you next month from Washington, D.C.